We are driven to host eminent personality as well as individuals who have shown great initiative towards driving forward change. Therefore, our distinguished guest for today is renowned Toronto-based watercolor artist, muralist, and award-winning animator, Mr. Prashant Miranda. He was recently the subject of National Geographic documentary for his travels across his native India as he drove through the wonder around him. Prashant Miranda was born in Kerala, grew up in Bangalore, and studied animation at National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. He then pursued a career in Toronto, Canada. He now balances his life between Canada and India, where he travels, paints, cooks, and sings. Being a chronic doodler, Prashant documents his life through his watercolor journals that he keeps with him all the times. Sir, it is our privilege to have you here with us today. May I request EML faculty advisor, may I request Sarika to welcome the chief guest on our behalf. Over to you, sir, for your much anticipated talk.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me here. And it is an honor to be able to share my stories and my ideas and my journey with all of you. So what I'm going to do is, you've got to excuse a little bit. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Excuse my technical abilities because I came with my MacBook Pro, which doesn't connect with the projectors here. So we had to do a little bit of juggling around so that my work could be transferred onto another computer, and I'm not very familiar with using the system very well, but we'll manage. So as the introduction went, I'm just going to take you through a little bit of my journey and my early influences of how I came to be an artist and how I came to be a sketchbook keeper. So should we dim the lights a little bit? A tad bit so that y'all could see. Yeah, is this clear? So, you know, as a child, I was really influenced by children's book illustrations, as many of you would have read different books. And these are some of the drawings of Beatrix Potter, who is a beautiful children's book illustrator. And essentially, she would draw animals in her backyard, the squirrels that came to visit, the rabbits, the insects, and then these became her children's books. Of course, Da Vinci had these incredible codices, and I know I'm sitting here amongst extremely extraordinary, brilliant minds of all of you. And the first time I saw a page of Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci, I was blown away because the page had a drawing of an invention, a drawing of a human body, a figure in motion. There were incredible kinds of things happening on one page, you know, and it showed the mind of a genius, you know, and of course, Indian miniatures have been really influential in my work. So I'm going to show you a few of these images of how textiles and crafts that we've grown up with have slowly made their way and inspired what I do. Of course, we've got such a rich tradition of Indian textiles with us that have infused its sensibility into my work. You know, a lot of the times also I didn't realize Indian miniatures are actually part of manuscripts. These were part of books which are very integral in keeping images and text, juxtaposing images and text. Now these images tend to be removed from the original kind of context in which they were made because we look at them as a framed artwork. But originally, like this painting, for instance, would have the text written behind it, would have a kind of an interpretation, or would have a story of what it is about. Um, at the age of 12, I started keeping a diary after reading the diaries of Anne Frank. Now, I'm not sure how very many of you know who Anne Frank is, but she was this lovely teenage girl with a brilliant mind who kept these diaries. Unfortunately, she was killed during the Holocaust of World War II and sent to a concentration camp where she died. But her diaries have been instrumental in shaping the lives, giving an insight into what a little girl, a teenage girl, was going through during this time, because they were in hiding. The family was in hiding in Amsterdam. And years later, when I visited the Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam and came across some of her diaries, I just read her diary at the age of 12, and I was inspired to keep my own diary. And it was a written diary that I started keeping in 1988. And years later, when I visited the museum, I actually saw up on the attic that these diaries, her real diaries, had little photographs, or, it wasn't just a written diary, it had images in it too. So even then, at that age, I realized, okay, I've been inspired by the juxtapositioning of image and text, which is what my work has come to be. So this is some of Beatrix Potter's work. Danny Gregory, who's now become a wonderful friend, lives in New York. And 5 years ago, he set up an online sketchbook school with a friend from Amsterdam, Kersher. And Danny's included me in several of his books, this one being The Creative License, Giving Yourself Permission to Be the Artist You Truly Are. And I call myself an artist, I consider myself an artist, but I think all of you are artists too. I think we are all artists. And very many indigenous cultures don't have a word for art because it's how we dress, it's how we eat, it's what we eat, it's how we cook, it's how we decorate our homes, it's how we walk, it's how we move, it's how we dance, it's how we garden, it's all of this is what art is. And this is the kind of definition I subscribe to, because we're truly artists, if you love to cook, then cooking is an art. Or if you love to garden, gardening is a fabulous art. And I feel that this approach for me has been really important, because everything is art. At a very young age, while I was studying in NID, so I grew up in Bangalore. I'll keep shifting between some of my early influences. I was born in Kerala, I grew up in Bangalore, and studied at NID in Ahmedabad. And I came across this man, Dan Price. He had this little photocopied zine called The Moonlight Chronicles. And this was the Chronicle Creed. And I consider myself a scribe. I call myself an artist, an animator, because I studied animation film design, and I still make animation films, and a scribe. And the word describe, or even scribble, I think all comes from scribe, someone who likes to draw and write and document things. So all our scribes on this lonely planet Earth promise to continue our sketching ways in search of truth and beauty, to take really big sabbaticals from the conventional life, to dwell in small tents by wild old streams, to honor all our freedoms by giving big thanks for good health, the morning sun, Shiloh's cookies, and lots of paper. To truly believe that less is more, but to own one warm sleeping bag, a pair of eyes that actually see, and one 1985 tan van because we love to travel and be free. While sitting there in Mother Nature's sunny lap, we pledge to practice non-judgment, to draw every day and write notes in our journals, to be silent and watch all the bugs, count the birds, to ride on clouds and study reality. Oh, and to eat natural foods, just like Mom said, and to always wear simple shoes. And I didn't know what a profound impact Dan Price would have on me, because I came across his work when I was in my first year in NID in '94. I mean, this is like already now 25 years ago. And when I was a student, much like a lot of you. And eventually I wrote him a letter, an old-fashioned letter, and he wrote back to me. He's in Portland, Oregon, and we would have this correspondence where he'd send me a photograph of his little tent by the stream or little drawing, and I would draw something. And what I realized is, we all drew as children, all of us. I don't know of any child who hasn't drawn as a child. It's just that some of us continue to practice practice this aspect of drawing. And for me, it's been many years of this practice that has helped it become easier for me to translate what I see in my head or what I see in front of me onto paper. So Danny Gregory also came out with a book called An Illustrated Life, which is a compilation of artists and designers and amazing people and their sketchbooks. And I was included in this book, and I felt really honored to be a part of this book because there were people who I looked up to, comic book artists, Robert Crumb, Stefan Sagmeister, all these designers whose work was in this book too. So I'm showing you some of these because you may have it in your library or may not, but if you come across it, it has inspired me. David Gentleman, who traveled and painted with these watercolors. I'm not sure if you've seen the book of David Gentleman's India, where he traveled around India doing these fantastic watercolors, which I was quite inspired with. This is Danny Gregory, Da Vinci, How to Make a Journal of Your Life by Dan Price and his Moonlight Chronicles. Quentin Blake, who illustrated a lot of Roald Dahl books, which I really loved, and I loved his little whimsical watercolor illustrations for children's books. These are some of the spreads of my work in Danny Gregory's An Illustrated Life. And then he came out with another book called An Illustrated Journey, which is about artists and their travel journals. David Gentleman. And so these are some of my early influences. So I'm going to keep this very informal, as I mentioned, the lecture, because I'm pulling out images of my work and from different folders to share with you various stories. But feel free to put up your hand and ask me a question at any time, because I think this is going to be a very informal talk. So to give you an idea of some of my early sketches, I won't go into like a 1998 sketchbook, but there may be a few images from that here. This is, so right after NID, during NID, I specialized in animation film design, and I'm going to end with some of my animation films to show you how my sketchbooks have actually translated into various other media. Like I paint murals, I animate films, I do ceramics, design textiles for fabrics. So it's come into various forms and iterations. But while in the animation industry in Toronto, I was lucky enough to design a 26-episode stop-motion animation series called Henry's World. And so a lot of my character designs for the show were originated from my sketchbooks. They started off. So this was a character called Father Time, and I'm like, who is that supposed to be? A character in his 40s. And so, as you can see, there's already little research sketches, ideas of who he's supposed to be, writing. This is from around 2001. This sketchbook was about 2002 on my first visits back to India from Toronto, where I'd spend 6 months of the year in India. So I've been doing this for 16 years. I get away from the cold, harsh winter of Toronto and come back to India which is why I'm here now, and I'm loving being here in this weather. So this was in Bombay. I had just sat across the Oval Maidan and the High Court and did a few quick watercolors. This is a trip in 2002, 15th August 2002, where I saw the Northern Lights for the first time. I went on a solo camping trip in northern Ontario to a place called Moosonee, and I camped alone. I took a 10-hour train journey from Toronto to Cochrane, and from there the Polar Bear Express to Moosonee, and a little boat onto an island on the Moose River, which opens up to James Bay and the Hudson Bay, which is pretty up there. But in August, I managed to actually see the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. And at that time, I didn't even have a camera. I would travel without any device. I still don't have a phone number. For 16 years, around this time, I chucked my phone and haven't got a phone number since. I do have a device to take pictures, and I'm connected with Wi-Fi, but I don't actually have a number. But this is the way I've been documenting my life, through my sketchbooks and through my visual journals, which are diaries of my life, except that they have images and text. So this is a very special evening in August of 2002. Some of my sketchbooks at that time were books I would bind myself. So I would collect matchboxes and make the cover of my book, or mithai boxes, little sweet boxes that I would cut my paper and fit it all into the box. Or I would take leather and bind a book with watercolor paper. Some of them are wooden boxes, some of them are bound with leather and wood. So I have or a little tiffin box, a plastic tiffin box at the end, and I would stuff it with my watercolor paper and make it my book. In '96, my dad went through a bypass surgery, a multiple bypass in Bangalore. And so this is 27th April of 1996. You can all see, right? It's fairly, I'm wondering if is this light too much or it's fine? Yeah, okay. Yeah, as long as it's clear. It was such a great memory now. What I've realized, these sketchbooks have become memory keepers. They are not only time-traveling devices for me, because I'm a very forgetful person. And the reason why I keep a sketchbook is actually to remind myself of stories and instances and experiences that I've had, because if you ask me what I did yesterday, you know, I've forgotten already. But the moment I open these sketchbooks now, I have more than 300 sketchbooks of my life over 30 years. They are literally time travel devices that take me immediately to that space and time that I lived in. So my dad is very well now, considering this is in '96. He's 84 years old and healthy, and he goes for his walks in minus 30 degrees in Canada. So these are some of my sketchbooks while in NID, and so a lot of them aren't precious. As I mentioned, some of them would be bound, some of them are on loose paper. Friends and I would have a little, a music club, much like there's a fine arts club over here and things like that. We would have a little Saturday night music club, and this was a jazz night, and our friends working on their light table. You'll see a recurring theme. I call myself a lunatic. I love the moon. I'm definitely a moonatic. There's a lot of that work that recurs in my paintings. And so this was what my diaries were in 1998 at the age of 12. And it was hilarious, because at that time it was like, in the morning, Francis was saying that there was a snake on the tree. I went to Silva Auntie's house. She gave me cake and wine, And so it was just like basic mundane kind of things that I would write about in my diary. But I'm so glad I started keeping that kind of a diary, which led to my visual diaries 4 years later. So this was also in 1996, sitting in the hostel. As I mentioned, I've had issues with my knees, and it's the reason why I get away from the Canadian winters. And here I am in the hostel with pain in my knees, and I've sketched it out. Geez, my knees, right? In July 13th of 1996. So these are quite old, 22, 23-year-old sketchbooks that I'm showing you. Some of these are like little explorations. This is a Moleskine where I would do explorations in ink and bleach. Likewise with this. And random doodles. So not all of my sketches are observational. Not all of them are penning down what I'm seeing in front of me. Sometimes they chronicle the madness in my mind, and surely you all know sometimes we've got our anxiety and fears or just a lot of stuff going on in our head, and I find that sketching and writing is a huge release, just as stream of consciousness is. These are some of my early travels, again, and I think this may have been my first trip to Pondicherry in 2002. So, at the India Coffee House. And so they become quite a great documenter of a time which I would have otherwise forgotten. I'm so glad I did a drawing of our school in Bangalore, which was built in 1892. Our school was founded, St. Joseph's Boys High School was founded in 1858. And it was, in the 2000s, razed to the ground, this heritage building, and a new building has come up in its place. But I'm so glad that I took the time to sit in front of it and do a little sketch, black and white sketch of it, because this building no longer exists. And you will see a certain pattern in my work, which is I love old architecture, I love nature, and I love the human body. And so these are recurring themes which happen in my work. This was our dog at that time. So now, so I've shown you some of my early works, and what I'm going to do is move on to some of my travels. So I left the animation industry so 99 was when I went to Toronto. Finished up from NID. From 94 to 99, I was studying in NID in animation film design, got into an animation studio, which was great fun. And then in 2002, I was like, I've just got to go back to India for 6 months, and I backpacked around India. And by 2004, I decided to pursue my art and become a full-time artist. So there are a lot of these early travels, and let me start off with a 2003 sketchbook, which might be fun because there's a little bit of Chennai and a little bit of South India, Bangalore, from a part of that travels. All I had was an old little box like this, I think a little cigar paper box that I stuffed watercolor paper, and as it says, Bangalore 2003, Prash Travels. And since then, I've literally been a nomad. I've been a vagabond. I travel all the time, not just 6 months in India and 6 months in Canada, but I'm literally traveling in a different city every month, which has been fun, but I think I'm ready to slow that pace down. So here we are. This was in Pondicherry, just south of here. As you can see, these were loose pages. This was Chennai, or this may have been Pondicherry too, yeah. This was at the Aurobindo ashram there. And as I mentioned, these sketchbooks not only chronicle my day-to-day events, but it also has, dream. I was sitting in a canoe or in a boat in complete darkness. So I've been documenting my dreams for more than 30 years, which has been really a lot of fun because I tend to forget things, and you know how fleeting dreams are. They disappear, but now when I look back at some of my dreams, I can totally make sense of a lot of them after 30 years even, and they have meaning in my life. So some of the text here says, writing in darkness because I was documenting a dream. Some sketches in Pondicherry, random doodles. heading on to Goa. This was Mysore. Bailakuppe, we went to a little Tibetan settlement after Mysore, and I camped there, brought my tent with me, and we camped out in the fields. I sketched the policeman in Pondicherry, and I think he sketched me. Spaces that don't exist in Bangalore anymore, like there was. These, This was here around Kottivakam side, and my aunt, both these aunts, called Florence Periama and Agnes Mami, and they're no longer alive. But I'm so glad I have this documentation of them by the seaside, looking out at the Bay of Bengal, my aunt with a walking stick and the wind blowing. And it's just a very, for me, it's not about capturing the reality. I'm not a realistic painter. It's more about capturing the essence of what I see. And so these are very few quick strokes that I've done, but they capture the essence, I feel, of what I see in front of me. So these, I pulled out this lot of sketchbooks because these would be reminiscent of what you've seen in Chennai, and these are around this area. This was at the Mysore railway station. And a cricket match, I think, which was happening in Madras at that time. Cricket conversations. Bailakuppe, where there were all these Tibetan monks. This was in Mysore, Chennai. And these are all from 2003. 5th February 2003. That's like a few days from now, but many, many years ago. And here we go, Madras, family reunion, a moment by the sea. Sketches of all these Tibetan monks pouring out of one of the monasteries in Bailakuppe. So I'm going to do just a few more books, a few more of my travels, perhaps one more in the south, Bangalore in the south, and maybe I'll give you a little snippet of what my life is in Canada. So this was, I think, a trip going to Coorg, and this is my cousin in Chennai who lives here, in Tambaram side. These were my cousins who lived in Kilpauk area. And a trip to Tanjavur, just sitting in the courtyard and doing a watercolor sketch in my sketchbook. This was a long Moleskine notebook which lent itself to a landscape format. My dad, when he was going through his bypass surgery, this may have been Hyderabad. Yeah. This one is a lovely old temple in Tambaram side, but I loved this huge old peepal tree, and I love trees. So when I end with some of my animation films, I'll take you through the films inspired by trees. But I loved this beautiful tank next to the temple with the, you all know the lines which on the walls. I think that may have been on my way to E Road. Belur, this is Bangalore. Hyderabad, Bangalore, Lalbagh. And I'll skim through some of these. Koshis, Shravana Belagola, that's Halibid. Coorg on top of the hills. And here we are, back again. Again, another little temple town, temple pond in the deep south, or in the little temple towns that we explored in Tamil Nadu. I'd done a Vipassana meditation in 2009, and then on my final day, I could actually, so this one time I didn't draw for 9 days, which was quite a feat for me because I always have my sketchbooks with me, and you know, when you do a Vipassana, you're not allowed to draw or read, or, so on my final day, I just like all the memories, the sounds, the images that were in my head were stored there, and they all kind of came out through my writing and my text. So I'll do one more sketchbook of my life in Canada, but there's a whole bunch that, if we have time, you know, there's Kashmir and Spain and Vietnam and Cuba and Benares and Paris and whatever, which, if we have time, we can go through. So anybody feels like seeing a particular sketchbook, put up your hand and let me know. As I mentioned, I showed you some of my sketches from my camping trip where I saw the Northern Lights, but I love camping. And so this is autumn at Maple Leaf Lake in Algonquin Park when, I think it may have been October, there's a 12th October 2008. And this is when all the leaves turn to gold and reds and yellows, and it's a magical time of the year. I love autumn. These are seasons we don't get to see here in a lot of India. Perhaps up in Kashmir you may get some of this, or in the Himalaya. But Canada has these boreal forests which are incredible, and the boreal forests are the trees that actually shed their leaves. And then you have evergreens, which are green throughout the year. But the magical time of the year, October, end of September, October, early November, if you're lucky, these trees all turn into this gorgeous, gorgeous, magical array of colors. This is a lovely apartment that I lived in for 4 years in downtown Toronto. And I was very lucky to have lived there. My friend Jane Glasgow, who passed away in 2010, asked me to house sit her magical space. And she was a collector of art, and it was a 1905 apartment, a heritage building that I was very honored and fortunate to live in. So these were some aspects of that time in that house, in that sketchbook. But you can see some of my inspirations in Francis of Assisi, Rumi, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Mother Teresa, Van Gogh, Beatrix Potter, Sheila, Klimt, you know, like, so this, and some of the work I showed you today in my early influences, like Quentin Blake. I showed you David Gentleman, pen down here. One year, in the one August of 2006, I think, I kept a page, just a postcard for every day. And this is that sketchbook, every day of the month, which would tie up to what some goings on in that day. A turtle, a blueberry, some whimsical. So I mentioned not all of it is documentative. Some of them are just outpourings from my head. Friends on the beach on Toronto Island. Toronto Island are these few little islands just from downtown. You take a 20-minute ferry ride, and it's like being in it's being like out of the city, which is lovely to get away. Sometimes I've taken my sketchbook into my bathtub and sketched while soaking and having a bath. When it gets too cold outside. So that one was friends who've come to visit, animals. This is when I documented my life in a page that day, an aspect of it as a comic book. And I'll show you some more of these comic books. More camping, living in cabins in the woods, which inspired me a lot. These were red pines, hanging out your swimming trunks to dry, and a lovely log cabin that we were staying in. And the end papers. So often I start off my book not knowing what I'm going to fill it with, but I my end papers, which is the first leaf of the book, I doodle, and this one is to document the meanderings in my head, November 2008. Autumn. There, you can see I love autumn. Fall, which is also called fall there, at my friend Jane's farm, a lamb farm. And so after I left the animation industry, friends and I got together, and as my foray as being an artist, we formed a little collective gallery called the Band of Gypsies. And usually on a full moon evening, we would have a party to show the latest paintings that I've done and the new work that our friends have done. And it was such a blast. This happened for 3 years, from 2004 to 2007. And it was such a blast. And this gave me enough incentive for me to continue making a living off of my art. These are some old, beautiful buildings of Toronto, and there was a year I had a show called The Charming Old Buildings of Toronto, where I documented some of the older charming buildings there. This is the Trinity St. Paul's Church, which was next to my house in downtown Toronto, catching up with friends. The library. Lately, I've been blowing things out of proportion. At that time, I had like big hair, yeah. No, I usually, I told you I didn't have a device to document anything for very many years. So these are all done right then and there. Usually around sunset, you have to work very fast, but that's when the light's changing. But during the day, you're fine, and I do work fast. Like, these would be done in around half an hour. Half an hour, I would finish the sketch, yeah. So they're done pretty quickly now, and as I mentioned, you know, it's practice. I've been doing this since I was a kid, and now after 40 years, it's become something that comes a bit more naturally. Yeah, I've documented moonlight over various spaces. I did a whole series of moonlight in Banaras, which I may show you for a show of 28 postcards of the moonlight in Banaras. Here, Tonight She Gives Me Clarity and Understanding. This was by Stony Creek. A friend has a beautiful cottage on this lake. Not Stony Creek, it's Stony Lake, yeah, in the Kawarthas. And this is Osgood Hall, downtown Toronto. So they're very quick, these sketches, and loose. You know, if you look at them, none of them have straight lines. I cannot draw a straight line. They're all wonky. You know, but they try and capture the essence of what I'm seeing. This is from my series of the Charming Old Buildings of Toronto, and these are fairly large watercolors. Some of them are tiny, and in order to show you, there will be some with scale. I live to draw, I draw to live. This is the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. 7th of January 2006, I got my Canadian passport, which allows me to travel a little bit more extensively without having to worry about visas to very many places, and I'm very grateful for that. I also have my OCI, my Overseas Citizen of India, so it's a good thing to have. This was Montreal. This was the University of Toronto, some beautiful steeples that are there. I've gone off on trips in winter, so this is the 2nd January, where I visited some old-growth forests in Tomogamy. Extremely beautiful. I mean, as much as I dislike the cold, being in nature in the winter is so magical. And this was the Tomogamy train station that I got off at and spent a few days in this magical space. I went ice fishing for the first time. Like, you walk on the frozen lake up until that little hut, ice fishing hut, and there's a hole there, and people just sit there waiting for a fish to nibble through the ice. Like crazy stuff which I would never have done over here. So to give you an idea of how kind of diverse and different life is over there, but Canada has taught me a lot. It's really so vast, so diverse. I took the train across Canada a few years ago from Toronto to Vancouver, and it was one of the most magical train rides of my life. This is the University of Toronto. Sometimes I would just take my sketchbook to the symphony orchestra, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, where I would document what I was listening to. And this may have been Prokofiev's Concerto No. 1, where I was just doodling the sounds that came to me. So, moving on, I'm going to show you some of, we'll come back to travels if we need to, but these are also documenters of memories, and I mentioned my moonlight postcard, so I'll show you what some of these were. I spent up to a year in Varanasi. I volunteered for a literacy organization called World Literacy Canada, which took me there. I went to Varanasi in my travels in 2002, over the New Year once, and I fell in love with the place, and I knew that I would love to go there and work. And World Literacy Canada was an organization that raised money in Canada for literacy programs for women and children in and around Varanasi, and in a 5-hour radius in villages around Banaras. And so while I was there, it was just so mesmerizing, the space, but I came up with a series of postcards, 28 postcards, which chronicled new moon to full moon to new moon, 28 days. The show was also called Postcards from My Past, where I'd picked up some really old postcards in a flea market in Old Delhi, I think, and painted on them. So here are a few of these watercolors that I did, some of them that I painted under moonlight, and some of them I dried under moonlight too. Yeah, it was a very special time for me. I first went for 3 months to work with women and children, and then subsequently for 6 months. I got a little CEDA grant, which was the Canadian International Development Agency, gave me an internship to go back there, a youth internship. And I loved it. I still have very fond memories of my time in Banaras. Full moon, yeah. So I'm going to now show you a few of the iterations of how these sketchbooks have translated into different media. Some comics. One of my childhood growing up in Bangalore, which I think is the Bangalore graphic novel. This is part of a book that I was asked to be included in, and it will give you an idea of my time. I've met a couple of students already from Bangalore. So my grandparents came to Bangalore in 1953, so we're originally from Tuticorin and Manapad in Tamil Nadu, actually. And my grandparents came to Bangalore in 1953, and as a Christian family in Richardstown, life was very different then. They lived in a little tiled roofed house on Viviani Road, and one of my early memories of that space was a candlelight dinner that my grandmother had for my sister, brother, and I. The table was set outside under the moonlight, and my grandmother brought out a delicious soup, which actually had all the letters of my name spelled out in that alphabet pasta in my bowl. So she actually pulled out, Prashant, Gerard Miranda, and so sensitively put it together in a bowl of soup for me. As dinner progressed, my grandmother enacted stories, transforming her hands into puppets that formed beautiful shadows on the walls by the light of the candle. She was magical and grew up with an old world charm of quaint happenings in Bangalore. I was 3 when my family moved to Bangalore from Kerala, and I lived there from 1978 to 1994. I cycled to school from Koromangala to Museum Road every day. The pace of life was different then. The weather was glorious with nature and trees everywhere. We biked off to wide open fields after school, exploring life by the lakes, trying to solve mysteries, writing notes with invisible inks thank you, as all young investigators would. Cobras visited our home while I sat on top of trees doing my homework. Frogs croaked at night, and I shivered on misty winter mornings while I pedaled to my morning piano lesson at St. Mark's Cathedral. Lazy Sunday afternoons were spent on the verandas of the Victoria Hotel at family get-togethers, and one would sneak a pint after college at Pico's. Soon, beautiful old buildings started to disappear. The Victoria Hotel became a mall. Trees were cut down. My charming high school, St. Joseph's Boys High School, founded in 1858, was razed to the ground, and a new building came up in its place. My grandparents' home turned into apartments, and the hordes arrived by the million, as it does in every city now. I left to study in Ahmedabad in 1994, and during my vacations back in Bangalore from design school, I would try to draw some old buildings that still remained. I knew that our days of our home were numbered, as my family planned to emigrate to Canada. The rapid changes in Bangalore seemed to coincide with the changes taking place in my life. But now I return every year and revisit spaces which still have the old charm that I was used to. A beer at Koshi's in the afternoon or a walk through Cubbon Park brings back spectacular memories. Bangalore still has a wonderful essence to it, and my old friends and family are reminders of what once was. As I sit on the metro and still see the canopies of the trees, I feel a nostalgia and a sense of anticipation of what the city is becoming. So this to me, is fairly, these are stories of my life that have been fed through my sketchbooks, through growing up there. A lot, as I say, a lot of these stories are autobiographical. And some of them you've seen, like for instance, the Aurora Borealis story that I didn't have a camera at that time, but this is a comic I did of actually going there and staying on the island on Moose River, where I met 3 Moose Cree men and their little boy who told me about the Northern Lights, and that day I actually got to see it. So this is, a little snippet of that story. Or the time, I don't know how many of you have seen the National Geographic documentary of me traveling through Madhya Pradesh, but I was invited to be part of this documentary in 2012. And it was a special time because I saw tigers in the wild for the first time and interacted with the Gond and Bega tribes too. And I saw 3 tiger cubs come out of the forest next to a reclining statue of Vishnu, a 10th century statue in the forest. So these are stories of mine which feature in my work. This is a comic I did after I did an artist residency in Assisi in Italy. And it was such a peaceful time in my life that this one was about peace. Yeah. So I could show you some of how this is translated into the publications that I do, which are also, or murals. Would you like to see some of the murals? I do have, we'll try and see if this file opens. I'm not sure. Oops. Oh, yeah. Could I do a full screen? Would there be a full screen slideshow? Oh, that one. Yeah, perfect. That one. What is it?
No, it's not visible. It should.
Yeah, that play
Oh,
button.
this is a PDF file.
Yeah, play button maybe. Let's try it.
Oh, that's
Well,
the next button.
okay. Yeah. It's a PDF. Oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. I mean, I'll just show you a few aspects of this. Was done at a Waldorf school in Hyderabad last year. Maybe you could turn on the air a little bit too, the air conditioning, because it's getting quite warm. This was at a Waldorf school in Hyderabad, which was fun and, of course, inspired by nature. This was a commission in Florida, where I painted in the living room of a house there. It was fairly large, about 12 feet by 10 feet. And this is what it looks like in there. This was done at a private residence in Delhi on a rusted metal background. This was on a beach shack in Goa. This was at at a hotel lobby in Chikmagalur, so a fairly tall one, about 18 feet high. This was at the Ooty Club in the children's dining room, at a friend's house. This is in Bangalore. Children's rooms. This is in Delhi. Exterior walls in Goa. Watercolors on walls in the corners of rooms. This I did in Toronto for a show where I converted the corners of the rooms into trees and the corners disappeared. So, yeah. So some of the murals and some of the publications, because I still love children's books. And what's the time? Yeah. I'll move on to the animation films because we're... Yes? What medium did you use for the murals? Mostly acrylics, because they are more of a weatherproof. So the murals tend to be acrylics because they are latex-based paints rather than watercolors, right? And watercolors you tend to use as smaller. But when I work large, I mostly use acrylics. Yeah. So I love children's programming. It's still, I'm passionate about education and children, and one of my first books was done as a fundraiser for World Literacy Canada, and this was printed by Oxford University Press. It's called Birdie Num Num, which is a Bhojpuri folk tale, and it was a super fun book to work on. Even when I was in the animation industry, I designed animated shows for children for TV. And so it was important for me to get back into children's programming without having to deal with the larger corporations who are controlling the kind of content and the stories. I wanted to illustrate stories that I actually liked. So this was the first book. And since then, I've done a few other books with a publisher, and a few in India. I'm currently working with the Idris Shah Foundation in London. This is a book on birds with the theme of air. If there was one thing I could be, this is a planet book called The Party in the Sky. What Can You Do with Red, Yellow, and Blue is a book on color and mixing color and the magic of mixing colors. This is a book I illustrated for Random House. It's a garden design book. And so everything from the end papers to the chapter openers, like these, and the little marginalia illustrations I did, which was a lot of fun. The author of this book is quite a renowned garden designer in Canada. Her name is Marjorie Harris, and I felt really lucky working with her. And She actually invited me to her backyard to see her garden, where I sat and did her portrait, which they used on the back flap of the book. If I Lived in a Treehouse is all about animals, and it goes, if I lived in a treehouse, who would live with me? A tiger or an elephant would keep me company, and it goes on like that. Or if there was one place I could be, it would have to be under the sea. And so this was all about being underwater and the magic of being underwater. If there was one place I could be, if there was one thing I could be, I'd have to be perched atop a tree. And this is about birds. An Illustrated Journey. I'd shown you snippets of An Illustrated Life, and this is Danny's other book with some of my work from, this was outside the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and some sketches in France and New York and Tadoussac in Canada. So what some of my children's books look like. And I did a book with Good Earth on the case of, it's called The Case of the Missing Tiger Cub. My friend Kalpana Subramanian wrote it, and we try to infuse some aspects of conservation and indigenous cultures. These are issues I feel strongly about. And so they're also coming into my work through my sketchbooks. As I showed you, when I've visited the Bandhavgarh National Park and saw those 3 tiger cubs come out next to the reclining statue, they've made their way into my children's books too. So these are aspects of my life that have now been translated into my work. So it's been a fun journey. During that time, I also got to interact with Gond and Bega tribes. And so I actually put together this for a magazine called the Indian Quarterly, and took snippets of my sketchbooks and wrote about it while I'm away. And I've just done the sequel for this called While I'm Sick. So without any further ado, because I think we're coming close to the end of this, I'm going to pull out some of the my animation films. It's on that, perfect. And I'll start with this one. I'm not going to show you my student films, but this one was inspired, sorry. Not this. 4 degrees north of the equator. Yeah. You can see a bunch of them on YouTube, but I thought I'll give you the premise to this. We could dim the lights maybe a little bit more. It's more effective that way. Yeah. I came across a beautiful old tree in Banaras which had both neem and peepal leaves. And the more I researched it, I found out that they marry these 2 trees because neem is considered an incarnation of Lakshmi and peepal an incarnation of Vishnu. And so these 2 plants are planted next to each other. A full Hindu wedding ceremony is done to marry these 2 plants, and then they grow together as one tree. So this was just loosely inspired by having seen that tree, and I got a grant from the National Film Board of Canada and the Ontario Arts Council to make this animated film called 4 Degrees North of the Equator. This film was inspired by a tree, and then the next film I did was Lift, the liaison of independent filmmakers of Toronto, asked if I would. Do I have to pause this or pause it? That's good. Okay. Asked if I would do a film, and I saw a beautiful tree. Again, this is 3 minutes, and I'll end with this. Saw a beautiful tree being cut down at Queen's Park in Toronto, downtown Toronto, and it was a northern red oak, which is native to Ontario. And so I was inspired to tell this, but it's more of mourning this tree, and I felt like I needed to tell the story of this tree.
If we lose this forest, if we savage the land, we might as well be cutting off our own right hand. For we and the earth are one, under the moon, under the sun. If we lose this forest, if we savage the land, we might as well be cutting off our own right hand. For we and the earth are one, under the forest, if we savage the land, we might as well be cutting off our own right hand. We might as well be cutting off our own right hand. We might as well be cutting off our own right hand. For we and the earth are one, under the moon, under the sun. If we lose this forest, we savage those forest. We might as well be cutting off our own right hand. We savage the land. The earth are one, under the moon, under the sun.
Thank you. So, yeah, so I'm actually really eager now to animate my third tree film called Trilogy. And I really want to work on very many of the stories that I've collected along the way, visiting sacred groves and magical forests and ancient trees. I've met some 2,700-year-old sequoia trees at the Sequoia National Park. I mean, just amazing stuff that I'd love to put together in a slightly longer, I tell people not to blink during these films because animation is 24 drawings for 1 second of animation. And it's, sorry, let me just pause this. How do I, or should we? Yeah. It's a lot of work. And so I've decided that I would love to tell more of my stories, and it's finding the right medium, but my sketchbooks are definitely an integral aspect of me remembering and documenting these stories, which have now translated into other mediums like shirt prints that I've done, animation, films, comic books, I mean, things that I love to do. And it's been a part of this daily practice that I've been doing for now more than 30 years, which has become a fun part of my life that is now translated into mediums such as these that I was sharing with you today. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, and all the best to all of you. Yeah, there are some, so yeah, thank you.
We'll now open the floor for question and answers. We request you to kindly raise your hands if you have questions and wait for us to pass on the mic.
Let me put a thing. Sure. Oh, you want to see Kashmir? Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so the prelude to Kashmir was, I decided to go there one March, and it was really amazing. I'm not sure what images I actually have in this folder, but it was curfew time. And it was you who asked, right? And so before leaving Delhi, I called and I said, is it safe for me to come? And he said, I'd booked a houseboat on Nagin Lake, and it was amazing. I got there and it was so peaceful. I couldn't believe that this was also India because daffodils were in bloom, magnolia trees were blossoming. I would sit under trees where almond blossoms and cherry blossoms were falling on my head, and I'm looking at snow-capped mountains of the Himalaya, and I was like, what? Like, I mean, I've seen this in Canada. This is gorgeous. And so, as usual, I forgot to take a charger for my whatever camera, and so this was the only way I documented my stay in Kashmir. There were few up until me on the Shikara getting there, and then that's it. So there may be a few of these. So the springtime in Srinagar, sipping kahawa and sitting. See, I said I feel like I'm in a haiku. That's how I felt. But on the 4th day, the curfew lifted. I was there for a week, and I got to walk to the old city and spend some time documenting the buildings, the Jama Masjid. While I was doing that watercolor, a little boy came up to me and said, he was sitting with his parents in the courtyard, and he said, you paint tigers? And I was like, yes. This was 2013. And he said, I saw you on TV. And I was like, what? Like, how did that happen? So I was spotted in Kashmir by a little boy who happened to see the National Geographic documentary on TV. But a kind soul, while I was walking around the shops around the masjid, ran out and said, I saw you sitting there and sketching. Would you like to come home for a cup of tea? And I went there, and these are some of the things I sketched in his house. But every day I'd spent a fair chunk of time sitting in my houseboat in the front, just looking at the light changing on the mountains and on the water, and documenting this. This was beautiful. This young boy, he said, this 19-year-old boy, he said, please do not show sadness on my face. And it broke my heart, because I realized, wow, all of them have been through a lot. Yeah, I mean, it was just quite a moving space to be in. I met some incredible craftspeople, people who worked on papier-mâché boxes, lacquered ones, which almost transported me to 500 years ago, because I went there and electricity went off, and they took me through their mud house with lanterns and showed me how they made brushes out of squirrel hair and duck feathers and mixed their minerals, and I was like, it felt like I was in a few centuries ago. So there we go, me getting there. And this was my front porch. My room. This was actually getting there, and the barricades up until I got to my room. And this is pretty much my scenario of my watercolors, my kahawa tea, and my sketchbook. Yeah, that's all I have. 2013. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
No.
Should I turn this on, or my voice will carry?
Hello.
Yeah.
I've been doing watercolor, so I know that watercolor is among the one of the toughest
Oops.
So you do it like you will have a fast paint. Obviously, you can use watercolor for doing fast drawing.
Yeah.
So have you discussed some of the challenges you face, you are facing
With watercolors?
color and all?
Yeah, so why I love using watercolors for me is because I travel a lot, and oh, you can shut that. I just wanted an interesting image in the background rather than. How do you shut this? Okay, just say okay. Yeah, I can go back. Hang on. Deep roots here. This one, because this was about my time in Tamil Nadu from my family. Like this is my bag, and so what I keep in this bag is my current sketchbook and my watercolors and my bunch of pens and pencils over here. So basically my studio, this is my studio, and and I travel around the world doing this because because it allows for me to paint under a tree, by the beach, by sitting and having a coffee. But what's nice is I also love infusing the water from that space into my painting. So, very often I use the water from the sea or the Ganga water in my paintings, or rainwater, or, whatever it is. So for me, why I got into watercolors in the first place was the portability of it. Like I could carry it everywhere. It dries quickly. It's not like I'm carrying turpentine and linseed oil and canvases and waiting for that paint to dry, because oil paints takes forever to dry, or tubes of paints. It's that little box which has all the colors of the universe. And I'm constantly learning every single time I do a watercolor. I'm learning something new because it teaches me something new. I'm like, you look at a sunset and go, okay, I haven't tried that combination of colors before. And immediately I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. Some of the challenges definitely are like, time sometimes when light is changing, or weather conditions. If it's too dry, your paint's going to dry immediately, or if it's too wet during the monsoon, your paints are not going to dry. I've had a funny instance in Canada where I was watching the sunset over a lake in November, and I was doing two watercolors. The sun was setting this side, and the light was gorgeous this side. So I was painting one here, painting another. And suddenly the sun set, and I noticed strange patterns appear on my watercolors. And my watercolors froze. They became ice. So that was the first time I actually had ice painting. You have ice wine in Canada, but this was an ice painting, and it was so I'd never anticipated for a watercolor to become ice, but that's what happened. So I would say time, but then that becomes part of the painting. It's not like I was like, oh, that's a bad painting, and someone bought that painting. I just call it ice painting 1, ice painting 2, and it's sold. Yeah, so. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Let me take a photo of all of you if you don't mind. Some of you. Yeah.
So what do you do if you draw something in your sketchbook and you don't like how it turned out? Like, do you tear it out or do you just like,
Nope.
leave it?
Turn the page over and do it again. How else will you learn? It's only one page of my life, you know. I mean, it's like I can't be precious about that bad drawing because the next day it may actually seem like a good drawing. You know, I think all of us, all artists are our own worst critiques, but I truly believe that's about all of us. We can be very harsh and say, oh my gosh, that doesn't look like you, that doesn't look like that person, that looks like an ugly drawing, because we love to say that to ourselves. But you know what? I mean, that's not true. It's like you have to shut that monkey in your mind and say, move on, like just move. It's only one page of my life. Turn the page over, try again. If that doesn't look good, turn it over. Before you know it, you'll have a full sketchbook at least, of bad drawings, but who cares? Anybody? Yes.
Do you have art blocks? What do you do about that?
Art blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I keep doing it as a practice. When I think I can't do it, or if I don't have any ideas, it doesn't stop me from actually drawing some more. Because what I've realized is practice is part of it, you know? I mean, there are several authors I've read who just say, okay, I've got a writer's block, but I'll go to my studio and write 10 pages, out of which I may take 2 words or 1 sentence out of it. But what I truly believe in, I have 3 P's. One is passion. Got to be passionate about what you do, whether it's anything, whether it's cooking or gardening or riding or swimming or riding a bicycle, whatever. And it's practice. Like, I do it every day, irrespective of what. I tend to pick up my pen or pencil and do a little sketch. It needn't be a realistic drawing, as I'm saying. Sometimes it can just be like doodles, like, you know, when you're speaking on the phone and you're just doing random subconscious doodles. But it's making a mark, I believe, you know, because whatever you're feeling translates into something. And I truly believe that practice, much like playing a musical instrument or the guitar or the piano or whatever, is you put in that many number of hours of practice into it, and it gets better. And the third P is perseverance. When you think, how am I going to make money out of this? I mean, I've got to stop right now. It's not working. You do it some more. When you think you can't do it anymore, you do it some more then. And that, I've realized, makes a difference because, you know, you've got to keep it going. And it just becomes easier because it becomes part of what you do without even having to think about it. And then something eventually happens, you know. I mean, like, okay, that looks like an interesting pattern. Maybe I'll draw it again, draw it again. Before you know it, you have a body of work which you could have an exhibition with. And, yeah.
Picking up on what you said about money, how do you support yourself when you're traveling?
Oh, by drawing every day. I've been painting for a living since 2004. And no one said it would be easy. And only mad people live off of their art. And clearly I'm crazy. But no, it's the most fun thing I've ever done. I mean, I could never go back to doing anything else because it's the most fulfilling thing. It's also an honest living. I love engaging in, there are a few topics now that I'm passionate about. Literacy in education, children's programming, trees in the environment, indigenous issues, the elderly and homelessness, just rights, equal rights for people, all people. So, I mean, the list continues, but I think I'm beginning to engage on these various kinds of platforms through my art. And that's what's really nice, because it feels like there's an aspect of it coming back to the community. And and so, I mean, it's hard work. That's it. There's nothing else. It's just hard work. You've got to do it every day.
So how and where exactly do you sell your art?
Do I sell my art? So I have exhibitions. There's one exhibition going on right now in Baroda at a gallery called Gallery Arc. But I'm illustrating 6 books for the Idris Shah Foundation in London. Now, Idris Shah was a Sufi author, grew up in Shimla through Afghani Indian parents, moved to Oxford, New York, London, and wrote many books for adults on Sufism. But none of his children's books have been published, and they happened to see my work, The Foundation. He died in the 90s. Happened to see my work and have asked me to do 6 books. So I illustrate children's books. I get commissioned to paint murals. I do illustrations for other things like, I don't know, wedding invitations and various other commissions. But the main ones are these. Yeah?
So you've been
Yes, I can hear you.
you've been traveling and sketching since a long time, right?
Yeah.
Didn't it ever feel like an obligation to do? Like, didn't you ever want to just shut the book and enjoy the moment?
Yeah, many times. And I don't. There are a lot of times where I've shut the book and enjoyed the moment, but then because it's not something I'm doing all the time. But there are times where I'm eager to open the book and start drawing, because it helps me observe things differently. Usually with a snapshot of a camera or something, it's such a fleeting moment that for me, drawing helps me look at details which I would never look at before. The shape of your eyes, or the details on buildings which are so intricate that I would never have paid attention unless I took that time to actually observe a little bit more. And I think drawing for me helps me observe things on a different pace. And part of my mandate of traveling and sketching and painting is I want to slow things down, Everything's so fast and so immediate in our day and age. We want everything in our fingertips. We want a quick fix to everything. If you're ill, you have to recover immediately, and that's not how it works. I mean, sometimes you have to wait for things to evolve at its own natural pace. And for me, drawing painting is a meditative activity. I love the process of, there's nothing I can do but wait for that watercolor to dry before I put my next stroke, because if I put the next stroke, the painting's done, it's gone, it's done. And so it forces you to actually spend time when not painting, actually working on the painting, to enjoy the moment in a different manner, where I'm actually still working on the painting, but there are other things to absorb and take while working on the process of the painting, because once the painting's done, it's done. But the journey is the destination. Like the process of doing it is way more enjoyable than the final end product. Like, okay, I have a painting, someone's bought it, whatever, it's out of my life. But for me, what I do remember is actually the process. And that process is, taking in the moments, however it is,
Thanks for answering that. One
welcome.
follow-up question on her topic. So,
Sure.
how do you start off professionally? So, what were the gigs you did initially, and how did
You
it
dive off the cliff into the deep end. That's what you have to do. Like, basically, you have to face your deepest, darkest fears. I was getting a steady income. I was I have a house to pay a mortgage for my elderly parents who live in Canada. They don't earn any money. They came there, and I was like, okay, I have to make this work. There's no like two ways about it, because if I don't pay that mortgage, my parents are going to be living on the streets. And it's not like I'm some kind of a free-spirited artist traveling the world with no responsibilities. I have responsibilities. You know, I mean, I had a mortgage to pay. I had heating and electricity and things to take care of that I have been doing for the last 18 years of my life. And so there were times when I'd be running to the bank to put the last, 50 rupees or whatever to make sure my mortgage is paid the next day. There was sufficient money in the bank to take care of responsibilities. And so it was terrifying. It was terrifying to know that I have to somehow make this work. But what I can say is it works, it happens. The universe has a way of providing, and if you're passionate about it, things will happen for you. If you have good intent that this is what you want to do, this is what, if I stop painting, I will die. That much I know. So you keep it going, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. And that's what happened. I would never have thought I'd be in IIT Madras giving a talk to any of you, right? Like, no way. But because I'm keeping scribbling in my sketchbook, like 30 years ago, I would never have imagined that this is the case where in November of last year, I was in Pasadena, California, giving a talk on the art of sketchbook memoir and sketchbooks as healing, because for me it's a healing activity, it is a meditative activity. First and foremost, it's for myself. I'm not doing it for anyone else. But of course, there's no reason for it, all my sketchbooks, to be under my bed and on my bookshelf and no one gets to see it. I want to share it. And this is what I've begun doing, sharing it on different portals, on blogs, on Instagram, on Facebook. And there seems to be an audience, a global audience for this kind of thing. So. Yeah. Anybody else? Pardon me? What? Competitors? Oh my goodness. Everyone, as I said, everyone's an artist. Like, I truly believe all of us are artists. So rather than focusing on, wow, that person's work is better than mine, or that person's work's so good, focus on the uniqueness of there's only one of you in this universe. And whatever comes out of you is yours. It's nobody else's. So, that much I know. Like, I know that the world is full of like the greatest artists, and if I start comparing myself with them, I will curl up in that corner and never wake up again, But the thing is, you are a unique person, and so is everyone else in this room. And that's what's more important. So then competition doesn't matter, because what you are trying to say is your voice. And sometimes I feel the need to tell the story or give voice to beings or people or things which don't have a voice, like a tree and a group of people who have been suppressed for a long time that need to say things that they've known for centuries, or a stone or a rock or a mountain which has now become concrete. There are ways to tell that story through art, which is very powerful. And it's an incredible tool. And so it's finding the right medium and finding your voice to tell the stories. Yeah. So that others can.
When you are doing an artwork, the emotions that you keep will be visible to the audience also.
Yeah.
Is it true?
Yeah, at times. At times, for sure. But I wouldn't want for the meaning to be a particular meaning. I would love the audience to interpret it in their own way, you know, because if you connect to an artwork in one way, doesn't mean the next person's going to relate to it in the same way. But it's definitely a very emotional thing. Like for me, I may be emotional and crying looking at a painting, and then the other person may think it's rubbish. Like, what are those squiggles on the, you know, on the paper? But it's, I truly believe that it is a powerful emotional medium to communicate. But I wouldn't say that everyone should get it, you know? Yeah.
Due to scarcity of time, we will be taking only one more question.
Can I draw something for you? If we had an overhead projector, that would have been amazing. But how would you see it, is the question. What should I draw? Here.
You can draw it right now and then we can post it.
Okay, yeah. I don't know, with a blunt pencil. Here. In my sketchbook, well, this was today in Kovalong Point, but anyway, I'll draw your face. Thank you. Well, thanks a lot for coming. Yeah, this was a treat, and it's really nice to be interacting with all of you, for sure. I mean, I would love to continue with this exchange because all of you are brilliant minds. I know from the student who picked me up from the airport to people I've been engaging all the way have such amazing, just brilliant minds. All of you are brilliant minds. So it's lovely to be hanging out. Thank you. I feel honored to be partaking in this space. So all the best to all of you too. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful talk. I am sure that the knowledge you have imparted and the ideas you have shared have left a lasting impact on our understanding of art. As a mark of gratitude, may I request EML student head Sarika to felicitate the speaker with a moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for organizing this. Yeah.
May I now request you, sir, to kindly leave us a message in the EML yearbook.
Sure. This is it? Okay. Yeah. Here, eh?
This is from this.
We wish to express our heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Prashant Miranda for his presence here with us today. I take this opportunity to thank all of those who have rendered this unfailing support to us in organizing this session successfully. I also thank the audience without whose presence this session would not have been meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. And on